Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm a county supervisor in Johnson County. Glad to have you with us. Iowa News and Views is a community affairs program brought to you across the state of Iowa on a variety of public access channels serving 15 communities now, and we'd like to welcome our viewers in Fairfield for this first showing of Iowa News and Views. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy the show. I'd also like to thank viewers around the state who have sent in questions for this show this evening and in past shows. We appreciate that. We're going to give you some information towards the middle and the end of the show about how to send us email and ideas for shows in the future and future guests. We appreciate you tuning in. I have my remote here tonight, and I'd like to say I'm going to set it down. I hope you will too, and stay with us. No flipping. Our guest tonight is State Senator Merlin Bartz. Merlin Bartz is a Republican from Grafton, Iowa, and he is the chair of the Natural Resources and Environment Committee. He's also a member of the Senate Ag Committee. Welcome, Merlin. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Grafton, by the way, is located in north central Iowa, up in the central part of our state, just north of Grafton, pretty close to the Minnesota border. You've come a long way to be here tonight, here in Iowa City. We're here to talk about agriculture and the role of, in particular, the Secretary of State, or the Secretary of Agriculture, I'm sorry, which is an office you're currently seeking, and we'd like to talk to you about some of those issues related to that. And to start out, I think we'd like to visit about the issue of local control, and in particular the raising of livestock in hogs. It's been a fairly hot issue in Iowa the last few years. A recent Des Moines Register poll suggested that about 51% of Iowans felt that county supervisors shouldn't have the ability to regulate those have the local decision on hog lot regulation. What's your sense about that? What do we need to be doing as a state to address that issue?
Well, first of all, I think the Register poll was very representative of the state of Iowa. Interestingly, there were some dichotomies in the questions. A lot of folks, even in determining whether they would like some larger units or not in their backyard, made differentiations between if it was corporate owned or whether it was owned by a local farmer. And I think that it's a very complicated issue. I know in the media, a lot of times we as legislators get asked the question of, are you for local control or are you for statewide criteria? And I've said for 3 or 4 years, serving in both the House and the Senate when a lot of this debate has occurred, that if it was that simple, we would have solved it 4 or 5 years ago. I think you're going to see the legislature move this year to what I call a balanced development approach, something that I talked about 2 or 3 years ago. That is safeguard a $12 billion industry, which of course is our #1 value-added industry in the state, and yet I think provide additional safeguards for the environment to deal with both urban and rural families that are very concerned about groundwater and surface water protection. And serving on both Natural Resources and Environment Committee as chair and Agriculture Committee, I think I have a lot of the ability to facilitate those agreements that we need to reach.
Should supervisors have local say-so?
Well, I think supervisors definitely should have more input than they are currently having. And one of the tasks that I have said is that the Department of Natural Resources needs to definitely acknowledge that there are local concerns in topography, local concerns in watershed areas that they are not acknowledging at this point. For instance, a couple of the permits that were granted, the local supervisors wrote letters, said we have a concern with this, we have a concern with this. The department response came back, not applicable, not applicable, not applicable. In fact, one letter, they said that 17 times. And another thing that I think has been part of an issue, and I've really tried to call the department to task in this area, is the department has said they don't have the ability to deny permits. Well, that's untrue. They have denied permits in 2 particular cases, Legis State Park being one of those. And if they can deny under those conditions, why could the department not deny under other environmental conditions?
Sure. Maybe that's a political question as much as anything. I think they clearly have the authority, but do they have the willpower to do it, I guess, and the backbone? And would they have the support if they start denying permits?
I believe that from a policy perspective, they have the ability to deny.
Okay.
And you're correct. It is a political question of whether they have the backbone to deny.
Sure. Sure. This is kind of maybe I'll come back to that in a second. In terms of state laws, the other thing that Register poll said that was about, Des Moines Register poll said was that about 60% of Iowans said we should not encourage larger, this trend towards larger hog confinements. Is there something that we can be doing in Iowa in terms of state law? I know in the last few years we've liberalized our state laws and allowed some of these industrial mega operations into the state. Are you interested in seeing us look at that and see to what degree we can turn that back some?
I believe there are a lot of policy decisions that could be made in the legislature that would accommodate allowing smaller and medium-sized producers to remain competitive and actually gain an advantage. A couple of weeks ago in the Iowa legislature, we passed some revisions in the Iowa Beginning Farmer Loan Program. I think that's very instrumental in bringing some first-time independent producers into livestock production or even land ownership in this state. And secondly, I think that we need to be sure that technology is available to producers of all size, not just large entities, and that we need to be sure that capital is available to any farmer, any agricultural person that chooses to utilize capital in their operation. The Iowa State University study shows that the most efficient hog production scenario maxes out at about 250 to 300 sows. And yet we're seeing in this state, I think somewhat because of market access issues and some premiums paid, I think we're seeing a continued trend, and I think that the Des Moines Register survey, going back to that, points that to some people that is a disturbing trend.
I see. So you would be in favor of state laws that would take a look at trying to focus some more resources to smaller, or medium-sized farmers? Is that
state policy always discriminates against some people and for some people?
Right.
And I would suggest that in regards to tax ramifications, in regards to policies that open the doors to smaller and medium-sized producers with technological improvements, that is something that we can encourage. Yes.
Great. There was a recent report from the National Commission on Small Farms, and they recommended that unless the USDA changed its priorities and began to help small and medium-sized farms, that we're not going to see very many in the future. I mean, we're going to see more farmers driven out of business and driven from the land. What should the USDA's role be here, and what would be the role of the Secretary of Agriculture in Iowa to address some of the findings of this report?
Well, this particular report had a couple of Iowans on it, one of them being Dr. Tweeten, I believe, who's a North Iowa native, and I also know his brother, Maynard Tweeten, who's from Lake Mills. Both of the Tweetens pointed to the fact that the USDA policy in some regard has driven some of the consolidation. And I think there is some legitimacy to that. If you look at past farm program, it has dealt specifically with efficiency of production. It has not ever talked about the issue of food security. And food security is an issue that I think the populace is generally concerned about. You know, the true efficiency would say that there would be one farmer on one packing plant in the United States.
Right.
But we all know that should not be the case. For instance, the Packers and Stockyards Act, passed in the 20s under President Teddy Roosevelt, intended to break up the monopolies in the packers. And interestingly enough, we have a more concentrated packing industry right now in this country than we did in the 20s when they were first broke up.
Okay. So in terms of the industrial agriculture, which we're seeing fewer and fewer more people driven from their land, larger and larger producers, a handful of companies really controlling the supply of food in some ways. What role does the Secretary of Agriculture play in addressing the question of having more people on the land? And it really comes back to this local authority on sighting of hogs.
Let me, if I may, suggest this course of action. First of all, if you look at the statutory authority of the Secretary of Agriculture, there are 4 objectives. The first is, I call them the Iowa objectives. Number 1, implement policy. Number 2, orchestrate a harmony between the land and the people. That's the O. Number 3, weights and measures, which is for safety and honesty. And probably the 4th is the biggest, the A, advance the interests of Iowa agriculture both within and outside of the boundaries of the state of Iowa. An active Secretary of Agriculture would not only work to advance the interest within the boundaries, but would attempt to lobby for U.S. Federal farm policy that protects our own and deals with this issue of food security. And I picked up, I know, the Sunday Register yesterday, and there was also some interesting articles in there about the number of Iowa farms and the gross income of those farms. I know Dr. Lasley at Iowa State University has also dealt with the sociological impacts. You know, we now have more rural non-farm people living in rural Iowa than we do rural farm people.
Sure. Those facts, just to cite those, it says that 23% farmers, 23% farm fewer than 100 acres, 34% farm 100 to 300 acres, 36% farm 300 to 1,000, and then just 0.6 farm more than 1,000. So the big, real big, is a pretty small number of farms.
And to couple with that, if I may, you may have also seen the study that showed that as high as 60% of those individuals filing a Schedule F, which is the farm return, now rely on either spouse off-farm income or the farmer off-farm income. And I think that points to some trends that we need to definitely look at, and if a direction needs to be changed, and I believe it does in some regards, if we're going to deal with state policy, we have to look at those farmers that are out there. And you know, a lot of those farmers in reality are farming the acres that you have stated and are depending upon off-farm income as part of their living.
Sure. I want to take you back to the whole issue of concentration in industrial agriculture. As we get bigger and have fewer producers, we tend to increase concentration. And it would seem like the local control issue is really a symptom in some ways of this more industrial approach to things. Local folks want to say so. More people producing food is better than less people producing food. That all sounds real nice, but how do we get there?
Well, in reality, I think you have to understand where we've been in order to determine where we're going. A lot of the outcry on this issue of letting us have, as county supervisors or individual citizens, more input, I think is a frustration that they believe that the state is not listening to their concerns. And I will cite, you know, some particulars in that regard. For instance, we have about 430-some lagoons in this state, lagoons, earthen storage basins, whatever. The Department of Natural Resources, once again, and I have to be a little critical, has said since 1987, with some groundwater protection, that no lagoon under no conditions should a lagoon be sited or be sited below groundwater table. Now, interestingly enough, when the Geological Survey Bureau did their analysis of the 20 Jack DeCoster lagoons in northern Iowa, which is up in my part of the state, I believe it was either 19 or all 20 of them were below groundwater table. And in fact, some of them were as many as 15 feet below groundwater table. Wow. And I think one of the reasons that we're talking about this local control versus statewide criteria is people have been frustrated with the statewide criteria and feel that there is nobody answering. You know, one of my roles as chair of the Natural Resources and Environment Committee is to call the department to task if and when this occurs, and I believe it is occurring.
Great. You're watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. We're at Midpoint. Come on out and check our webpage someday. We've got a nice webpage. Learn about the show, how you can be involved in it. Also, give you the address there. Also, check out email. Send us some email about the show. If you got some ideas for guests or content, we'd be interested, or questions. Please send them to us. Also, no flipping. Put that remote back down, and we've got about 15 more minutes of show here. We're talking with State Senator Merlin Bartz. He's doing some things in the Iowa legislature to try and address some of our concerns about agriculture. He's also offered himself up as a candidate for the Secretary of Agriculture here this year in Iowa. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about issues.
Correct.
So let's be clear about that. Merlin, water quality is a big issue around the state of Iowa. Agriculture certainly has an impact on it. One of the issues of a Senate file bill, I think it's 2222, deals with trying to address monitoring of streams and creeks in surface waters, groundwater and surface water. It's some unleft business from the Groundwater Protection Act. What do we need to be doing there? Folks are saying we're not doing enough.
Well, first of all, if I'm thinking of the correct piece of legislation, it is in the Natural Resources and Environment Committee. Right. And I believe it is on our agenda for tomorrow, and I'm planning on moving that bill out of committee. We will amend it to some extent, but we're trying to find a workable situation that accommodates, you know, our budgeting practices in the Senate and still bringing to task those concerns that people have about monitoring groundwater quality. I would also bring to your attention another bill in the Iowa legislature, which is on the floor of the Senate right now, called a Lakes Management Bill. And this bill deals with a $400,000 appropriation for some diagnostic studies of lakes and streams in this state, and couple that with a section of the code already existing, 357E, which allows for lakes management districts to be set up much like sanitary districts or water districts.
Great. Ag land use has a significant impact on water quality, and with just about 50% of our land which is farmed under conservation tillage methods, which is a good thing, how do we convince other farmers that haven't done conservation tillage to get involved here?
Well, I think you have to first of all understand that conservation tillage in different parts of the state means different things.
Okay.
In my part of the state, Worth County, where my wife and I farm, we have no highly erodible ground. In fact, we have, I believe, of about a 1,000-acre operation between my father and myself, I think 1 acre that has more than 3% slope.
Wow.
So crop residue is less of an issue, you know, for blowing and for water carrying sediment than it is, say, in some of the hilly areas of the state. Land use for certain types of livestock operations, cow-calf operations, more your types of land over here in Johnson County, I think is something that we can deal with in the legislature. And interestingly enough, you have to give people incentives to promote the correct land use policy. For instance, we have some incentives for cow-calf operators that I think allow them to offset some of the property tax ramifications of keeping land in pasture.
I see. I was hearing the radio this morning, Minnesota has just moving forward on a law to deal with buffer strips along streams and rivers, and I don't know if they're going to be successful in doing that. There's been a lot of opposition to that here in Iowa, and looking at the sampling that's been done of our rivers and streams, it indicates a fair amount of manure does end up getting into our streams, and runoff, and I suppose soil sediment as well. What's your sense about that? What can we be doing as a state to try and provide buffers to our waterways?
I think we need to couple in this case agricultural issues with the USDA. There is a federal program called the EQIP program, which deals with some cost share dollars for developing these types of buffer strips, as you may call them. Once again, I think the carrot is better than the stick approach in this regard. We have moved in this state away from much of the sediment erosion that was taking place in the 70s, and I know that I don't have that exact statistic, but it's available there from USDA or Iowa Soil Conservation. We need to continue to move in that direction. We also need to deal with not necessarily just agricultural runoff, but for instance, in my home area, Clear Lake, that I represent, Clear Lake is a very large lake with a very small watershed, and their major problem is phosphorus from what they believe is storm sewer runoff from the city of Clear Lake. You know, that is an issue. That is an issue for rehabilitation of the lake, and actually in that case it's a lawn fertilizer that's creating the problem.
I think that's an excellent point. We have significant urban runoff problems, and I know that farmers have taken the brunt of it over the last number of years. We've let up a little bit there, but there's significant urban problems as well that we need to be addressing. Regarding the question of monitoring, coming back to that for a moment, seems like we don't have a lot of good data on maybe types of programs we need, and we need to begin to collect this data and begin to monitor and develop a database, I suppose. And will that kind of legislation in terms of this bill, I assume some of that's going to make it through and provide actually the public with some information about the quality of our streams and rivers?
You're correct, and I think we need additional information.
Okay, so do you think that that's something that's we're going to see this year?
Well, I have said since last summer that the Lakes Management Bill is one of my priority pieces of legislation. And you know, before the show we were talking about the funnel deadlines. I mean, I have it, it's live and kicking, it's on the calendar, it was re-referred to appropriations so they can deal with the dollar amounts today. And it's still a priority of mine, and it's one of those have-tos as far as I'm concerned.
Very good. I know Shell Rock and the Cedar River up in your neighborhood run between Grafton's between those two places, and I'm sure that the folks downstream would like to see some of that kind of monitoring done. I know the Mississippi River is another.
The Century Farm that I farm actually drains into the Shell Rock.
Is that right?
And another parcel of ground that we farm drains into the Cedar. So you've done your geography homework tonight.
It's easy to look at a map. Organic agriculture, what
Certainly.
role does Secretary of Agriculture play in encouraging? I know there's some debate about what's organic, irradiated food and the like.
Correct.
What's your sense about that? We're going to see a
First of all,
more happening there.
we need to develop a definition. The reason we need to develop a definition is our customers want a definition. They want to be sure that the product that they order, whether that be a Japanese tofu maker or a beef producer processor in China, they want to be sure that the product they order is the product they receive. We've moved in this state from about 2,000 acres of organic crops to about 60,000 in about a 5-year span. And I was on the Iowa Economic Development Tour with the Soybean Association for food-grade soybeans. And I think there definitely are some markets in the agri-futures area, in the value-added area, where we as Iowa can produce the product that the world needs and be environmentally friendly.
Great. That's good. It'll be good to see that, some more development in that area. It's a niche market that will be good to see some more development there. We're now to the point in the program where we're going to switch over to the People's Podium. We have with us tonight former State Representative David Osterberg, and he's also a candidate for state or U.S. Senate. He's not here to talk about his effort there. He's here to talk about the National Commission on Small Farms, and we'd like to hear from him now.
Thanks, Joe. Merlin? The National Commission on Small Farms is now reporting its findings to the U.S. Department of Agriculture and to President Clinton. An article in the Sunday Register on the 22nd by George Anthon quotes the Commission as saying, U.S. public policies continue to promote bigness, and cautions that unless some changes are soon made, quote, we will no longer have a choice about the kind of agriculture we desire as a nation. Another report, that one that came out of the Center for Rural Affairs in Walt Hill, Nebraska, was recently in a lot of newspapers in Iowa also. It talked about how much more economic betterment comes to small communities which are surrounded by small hog producers rather than by the industrialized hog mega factories. So 2 questions. Can farmers economically grow hogs at a scale that gives us the benefits of locally controlled agriculture? And second, can we have operations without so much of the cost to the environment and without the move to bigness that the recent report by the National Commission on Small Farms decries? And the answer is yes. And part of the reason for the yes is a technique called hooped structures. Now, hoop structures are steel tubular arches, and they're covered with a very tightly stretched tarp. That tarp is generally some kind of polyethylene fabric. There's a feeding and watering system at one end. It's rests on concrete. And the rest of the Quonset hut-like building is full of deep bedding. The building ends are generally open most of the year. Now, the bedding is the secret to this technique. Periodically, more big bales are put in with the pigs, and they tear them up and chew on them, make shelters out of them, and the straw and the cornstalk mix gets together with urine and feces and starts a composting system that heats these unheated buildings. Now, the cost of the bales and the bedding is close to the cost of fuel and utilities and repairs on the confinement buildings, which are the alternative. Now, this is an already proven technique. There are several varieties of hoop structures for sale. They were developed in Canada. They're designed for very cold temperatures. They're cheap, $11,000 to $13,000, according to a recent publication of the Leopold Center at ISU. The size of the structure I toured near Ames was 30 feet by 84. You can also get 30 feet by 72. They can hold up to 220 pigs at a time. Now, the cost per pig space is just much, much lower. And things like average daily gain, feed efficiency are fairly similar between these structures and the more normal technology, the more expensive confinement technology. Farmers report that the death loss may be even lower for hoop structures. And they're very versatile. If a farmer decides to get out of hogs for a while or get out entirely, he can use that structure for storing equipment, for storing hay, for having some other kind of livestock in it. It's very, very versatile, which is exactly the opposite of confinement buildings. Now, like everything else in what's called sustainable agriculture, there's no free lunch here. It requires management to make the hoop structures work. A different kind of management, but real management nonetheless. Farmers quoted in the Leopold publication say that it takes about the same number of hours of work, but they're different things that you do. But the difference here is this method of producing hogs seemed to remove some of the problems we've been having with hog production in Iowa. There is less odor, which neighbors certainly worry about. There is better manure management because you get a composted form that you put on the fields. And there is a less upfront expense, so a farmer has a chance to remain more independent in this area of so much contracting with out-of-state corporations. So, the hoop structures give the proponents of more sustainable agriculture a technique or a process that they can point to when they're told that we just can't have a good environment and hogs together. We can. Hoop structures sustain the farmer and they sustain the environment. They are the answer that most Iowans want. They're a way to produce hogs which is economically viable and more environmental. So start looking for hoop structures in your rural neighborhoods. They are being set up all over the state of Iowa.
All right. Thank you very much, David. That's very, very interesting, very thoughtful, and as usual, we're trying to do some interesting content, and we'd like to thank David Osterberg for being here. I'd also like to thank Senator Merlin Bartz also for visiting with us today from Grafton. Good luck in your efforts this year.
Thank you very much, sir.
Very good. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host of the program. Keep tuning in. We'd like to again say hi to Fairfield. They produce some organic tofu there in Fairfield, American Pride, that they do a very nice job with. I'd like to highlight that sometime. I'd like to thank the crew. I'd like to thank the sponsors. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Remember, this is just a TV program, and what's really important is what you're doing each and every day in your community to make a better place to live. Thanks a lot. We'll see you.